What's the matter with Germany? That's the question the European Commentariat has been asking following last weekend's federal elections. The ruling centre-left SPD suffered its worst result since 1887. It was reduced to just 16% of the vote. Meanwhile, the right-wing populist AfD surged into second place with a record high of 20%. The centre-right CDU came first in the election, but almost by default, scoring its second worst result ever. In Germany, as in so many other countries, voters are clearly furious with the alleged mainstream, even if they're not totally convinced of the current alternatives. The AfD has long been deemed beyond the pale, given some of its leaders' fondness for trolling Nazi references and its more hardline policies. But voters were clearly willing to look past its more obnoxious rhetoric and spokespeople to send a message to an out-of-touch establishment. Why? It's really not that hard to work out. And no, it's not because Germans are falling for Nazism all over again. The cost of living, energy, the war in Ukraine, all of these issues and more loomed large in the German election debate. But above all, this election was about migration, terrorism and security, taking place as it did against the backdrop of a string of attacks committed by asylum seekers and Islamists in recent months. Just last Friday, a Syrian refugee was arrested for stabbing a Spanish tourist at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial. Investigators say the attacker had intended to kill Jews and was carrying a prayer rug and a copy of the Quran, suggesting a, quote, religious motivation, unquote. Before that, there was the Munich car attack a few weeks ago, where an Afghan asylum seeker, a suspected Islamist extremist, ploughed a Mini Cooper into a trade union demonstration, killing 2 people. Before Munich, there was Aschaffenburg in January, where another Afghan asylum seeker with a history of violence and mental illness stabbed a group of children in a park, killing a 2-year-old boy of Moroccan heritage and a 41-year-old man who tried to intervene. The killer had agreed to leave Germany, but was still living in asylum accommodation at the time of the attack. Before Aschaffenburg, there was Magdeburg in December, where a Saudi refugee and ex-Muslim sped into a crowd at a Christmas market, killing 6 in a deranged stand against what he saw as the Islamification of Germany. While the attacker had been a long-time resident of Germany and was hardly straight out of central casting, it beggars belief that the security services had not caught up with him, given his erratic behaviour and violent social media posts uncovered after the attack. Before Magdeburg, there was Zorlingen last summer, where a failed Syrian asylum seeker and suspected Islamic State member took a knife to a crowd gathered to celebrate the city's 650th anniversary. He killed 3 and injured 8. He had also been slated for deportation, but evaded capture through the genius ruse of briefly disappearing from his assigned accommodation. And before Zorlingen, there was Mannheim last May, where a suspected Islamist extremist stabbed 6 people at an anti-Islam rally, killing a police officer. Aside from the chosen weapon, the parallels between Mannheim and the Munich car attack are striking. Both alleged attackers were Afghan asylum seekers who came to Germany alone as minors. Both had their asylum applications rejected but were eventually allowed to stay on, and both appear to share an Islamist motivation too. Islamist terrorism, as we noted in a video we put out on this channel last year, is staging a barbaric comeback across Europe at the moment, and in Germany in particular. Indeed, just look at the many attacks that were foiled in Germany of late. The list is long and chilling. A group of suspected Hamas members were arrested in December 2023 for plotting to target Jewish sites. Last March, 2 Afghans reportedly backed by ISIS were arrested in Germany for planning to attack the Swedish parliament. A month later, a group of teenagers were arrested on suspicion of glorifying ISIS and a plan to throw Molotov cocktails at churches. A suspected Iraqi ISIS member was arrested near Stuttgart last June. That same month, a 15-year-old was sent to youth custody for 4 years for his plan to attack a Christmas market in Leverkusen. During the 2024 European Football Championship, an ISIS plot was foiled just hours before the final in Berlin. In October, a Libyan citizen was arrested on suspicion of preparing an attack on Israel's Berlin embassy. In December, a 37-year-old Iraqi asylum seeker was arrested for allegedly planning to attack a Christmas market in Augsburg. Within a few days of that, 3 young suspected Islamists were also arrested over a plot to attack a market in Frankfurt or Mannheim. And just last week, a day before the Holocaust memorial stabbing, a Chechen teenager was arrested on suspicion of planning to attack the Israeli embassy in Berlin. And breathe. This is not normal. At least it shouldn't be. This past year or so, Germans could be forgiven for thinking that they were experiencing the first blushes of an insurgency, so relentless has the onslaught been. It seems that the combination of Hamas's 7th of October attack, which excited Islamist anti-Semites the world over, and the tumorous resurgence of ISIS, particularly in South and Central Asia, has inspired one plot after another in Germany and beyond. The reasons Germany has found itself particularly vulnerable to these horrors are many, but will be grimly familiar to citizens across Europe. For one, Islamist terrorism has somehow become both Europe's primary terror threat by a country mile and the one politicians struggle most to talk about. When the SPD's Nancy Faeser became Germany's interior minister in 2022, one of the first things she did was abolish a government working group on Islamism. Naturally, she set up one on Islamophobia instead. The security services have continued to do their best as the plots have piled up around them, but there remains a top-down queasiness about confronting Islamism, born of a bigoted fear that doing so might in some way alienate ordinary German Muslims or activate the Nazi lizard brains of the white German masses. Only now are mainstream politicians beginning to talk tough about Islamism, rather than talk vaguely about the need to defeat hate as they'd done so before. But without genuine political will, courage and focus, they can't possibly be expected to assail this threat. Then there is the issue of migration and asylum, a particularly acute and thorny problem in Germany. Then Chancellor Angela Merkel's decision to chaotically throw open Germany's borders amid the 2015 migration crisis looks with each passing year like a reckless virtue signal for which ordinary people have had to pay the price. More than 1 million people claimed asylum in Germany in a single year. Meanwhile, the responsibility for vetting, accommodating and integrating new arrivals was shunted over to punch-drunk local officials. The numbers have remained historically high in most years since. Germany, like so many other European countries, is also hamstrung by absurd human rights rules and an inept governing class, and so in recent years it has struggled to deport people, even when it has become clear that they have no right to stay in the country or have committed serious crimes while there. You do not have to be some kind of xenophobic lunatic to recognise that such an unmanaged, sclerotic system is fraught with peril from a purely security standpoint, even before you get into the other crucial issues of integration, housing and resources. It should go without saying that most of the newcomers to Europe this past decade will have been decent human beings, looking for a better life, free of war, poverty or both. Hardships which were in many cases fuelled and made worse by the West's feckless foreign wars. But it should also go without saying that an unguarded border can be crossed by bad people as well as good, including by those who are fleeing not war and persecution, but murder charges and even terror charges in other countries. What's more, a system which essentially incentivises young men to get themselves to Europe by any dangerous illicit means necessary, leaves even the best of them alone in a new land, vulnerable to crime and radicalisation. In all this, women and children, of course, barely get a look in either. Across Europe, nations have ended up with asylum systems that aren't so much generous as they are insane and irrational. Systems that fail many of the people we should absolutely be helping, while rolling out the red carpet to those who pose a threat to innocent people. Take Britain. Our courts have been granting asylum to Afghan sex offenders who managed to make it here. Meanwhile, Afghans who served with British forces during the Western occupation have been left to rot at home in Afghanistan, living in fear of a knock at the door and the Taliban bullets in the head. What's more, in Germany and across Europe, migrants and their children are also among those having to suffer the consequences of the elite's out-of-control migration and asylum policies. During the Zorlingen knife attack, an Iranian refugee narrowly escaped with his life. The Moroccan child, who was killed in January in Aschaffenburg, wasn't so lucky. Wir schaffen das. We'll manage. Those were the words that defined Angela Merkel's supposedly liberal, open-hearted response to the 2015 migration crisis. Almost a decade on, and Germany hasn't been managing well at all. Merkel's migration policy has proven itself to be anything but compassionate, and voters are refusing to put up with it all anymore. Merkel's CDU may be on the verge of retaking power, but only by repudiating, rhetorically at least, much of what she stood for on migration and asylum. Meanwhile, record numbers of voters are willing to roll the dice on a party like the AfD if it means the political class might finally take notice of their concerns. What's the matter with Germany? It really is quite simple. It's been failed by a technocratic establishment whose days we can only hope are numbered.